Um, Last year, I had a great opportunity to teach a course at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics, something David roped me into. And he really wanted to bring a rural perspective or a rural dialogue to the Institute of Politics and to the University of Chicago. Around the same time, I was learning about some of the interesting behavioral research being used by campaigns to more effectively persuade voters to support specific candidates or issues. And I met two great kids. I call them kids because I'm really old and they are young. Adam Zabner and Danny Vessel. I can never get your name right, Danny, but you are two of the finest students I met at U Chicago, and I somehow convinced the two of you to become interns at One Country. And I think this is, for me, a wonderful kind of full circle that I don't just get to be the person meeting you and smiling when you're talking, but the rest of the folks who are on this Zoom get to meet you and feel a lot more optimistic about what's happening in the middle of the country, but also what's happening on college campuses to build integration and understanding, not just across racial divisions or religious divisions, ethnic divisions, but regional divisions. And so I'm going to turn it over to Danny and Adam to give us a few minutes. I think you got 15 minutes to make your pitch, but you should start out with, I really liked interning for One Country, so we get two great new interns just like you. Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Senator Heidkamp, for that introduction. And we're just so thankful that we got the opportunity to do this research over the summer. We spent the summer sort of doing research on how we can do these things better and organize to build power in rural America. We wrote a little report, and we're really excited to share what we found with you. My name's Adam. As Senator Heidkamp mentioned, I'm a fourth-year neuroscience student at the University of Chicago. I was an organizer on the Pete Buttigieg campaign, and I was a regional organizing director for the Iowa Democratic Party in 2020. And like I said, just an incredible opportunity to get to do some research into these issues. Danny?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, my Zoom just crashed, but I'm back. Hello. My name is Danny Vesecky. Like Adam, I'm a fourth year at the University of Chicago. Really excited to be here. A little about me. Before I worked at One Country this summer, I worked on the Tom Malinowski for Congress campaign in 2018 as a field intern. And I was a research assistant at the Harris School of Public Policy. And I really did enjoy interning for One Country this summer. So I'm going to talk a little about what we did and why we did it real quick. I'm sure these maps at the bottom of the screen are familiar to everyone watching. Over the last decade, the Democratic Party has weakened in rural areas a lot. And we really wanted to know why this is happening. We wanted to investigate, why is it that we've become more reliant on urban and suburban areas, and how can we sort of reconnect with rural voters, expand our base there, and sort of undo some of the damage that's happened there recently. There were a lot of really innovative campaigns in 2020 with the really wide primary field and the general election. So we wanted to look at all these different campaigns, talk to people who were involved with them, and see what we could learn from it. In terms of methodology, we did interviews with about 30 or so people who worked on various campaigns. We talked to people who were on the ground organizers as well as campaign leadership, people who worked in primary and general elections. And we talked to strategists working across a pretty wide variety of states, including, of course, Iowa and New Hampshire, but also other states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, California. So we really captured a very diverse amount of views and ideas here, I think. So I think, Adam, if you'd like to go into our specific findings.
Yeah, so I'm going to split this up into three steps that is how a lot of organizers sort of view the framework of a campaign. So step one is building relationships when you show up. And what we learned is that this is especially key in rural areas. A lot of folks talked about sort of showing up in places where there was a lack of existing democratic infrastructure, a lack of trust for state parties and campaigns. And that really made it important that organizers have the time and the resources to do this step, which obviously means showing up early. But organizers told us that the most important thing for building this trust is to become an expert on the area you're organizing. They said, the folks that were local to the place they were organizing tended to have a lot more success. But there were folks who were really successful coming from cities into urban areas to organize. And they said doing things like driving without GPS to learn sort of the lay of the land and the landmarks, spending their free time and actually living in the area where they were organizing instead of a nearby city so that they could be seen as a community member seemed really important. And then following the lead of activists was something we heard time and time again. A lot of campaigns come in with an idea of what they want to do, and an idea that sort of all these local activist groups should just fold in and follow their lead. And what we learned is that can sort of, going back up to the trust bit, erode that a little bit. And so it was important for folks to show up early, play into, what local activists wanted to do, and then start to implement the plans of the campaign. Step two is building teams. So, once folks had created those relationships, they needed to create a structure that would allow them to reach voters and persuasion at the scale that you need to win, and make an impact. So really the key here was identifying volunteer leaders, and training them. We talked to organizers who had 6-7 counties for a general election. You obviously cannot be everywhere at the same time. So that's why this step is so important. And in 2020, there were a lot of innovative things that organizers did to do this. So relational organizing was used on a really massive scale by some of these campaigns. This meant that they would ask their key volunteers to reach out to friends and get them involved, and take advantage of existing networks. So, they learned that if someone is in a church group, rather than having them call, random voters who are Democrats and ask them to volunteer, it's more effective for them to talk to the people in their church group that already trust them, already like spending time with them, and get them involved that way. A lot of volunteers held things called house meetings. So they would invite their friends over, give them the pitch on why they're involved, make them feel really comfortable, and then sort of build them into that team. Another thing we learned about building teams is that Facebook can be a really big tool. So, everyone knows Facebook has become really huge in rural America. And some of the more innovative organizers we talked about, in those one-on-one meetings early on where they're building trust, one of the questions they would ask is, can you add me to every Facebook group you're in the area? And what they told us is that even a non-political Facebook group, like a town's, resale page or garage sale page, something like that, can be a great way to hear what's happening in the community and also to reach folks that maybe aren't typically involved in politics, and get them to hear the message and show them how they could be part of your campaign. Finally, we learned that virtual organizing became a huge tool in 2020 and it's here to stay. So, in 2020, because of the pandemic, a lot of campaigns had to move virtual to Zoom meetings. And like I was talking about before, for an organizer with 6-7 counties, it can be a lot of drive time if you want to do one meeting. And what they told us was, all of a sudden they had these Zoom meetings with activists from 7 counties in one space. And for a lot of those folks, it was the first time they maybe had been in any kind of physical or virtual space with 20-25 other Democratic rural volunteers. And that was really, really powerful, for making folks feel like they were part of something bigger. And so it's not going to be perfect for everything. Obviously, showing up is still really important. But this was a tool that folks felt like, could be really important going into the midterms, even, crossing our fingers that we're able to do things fully in person. Step 3, you've built your team, you have everything you need, is the persuasion that Senator Heitkamp was talking about. And it's going to be key in parts of the countries where we're really behind. And, it's not enough just to turn out the folks that agree with us. We really need to do the work of changing people's minds. We learned that persuasion is really hard. That was the first thing every organizer said. It can take a lot of conversations. And that's another reason to show up early. But organizers told us, when they talked to someone 2, 3, 4 times over the span of several months, they felt like they were able to start having an impact over the span of those conversations. They talked about listening first and identifying values and issues that they connect with the voters. So, organizers spent a lot of time working on personal stories relating to these values. And once they would identify a value that was important to the voter, they had a way to connect that to the larger campaign that was a lot more effective than just talking about policies or bullet points or talking points, something like that. The last thing we learned here is that an important element of persuasion is actually being really visible and mentioning other Democrats in the area. A lot of organizers talked about the sense that people have in these communities that there is no one that's Democratic leaning there, because the truth is, in a community where only 20% of people are voting Democratic, a lot of those folks are not vocal about it and might fear retaliation, to be honest. So, when you can show that there are other Democrats and that there is another option, that can be a really effective way to start getting people in the mindset that they actually have a choice. And this was really, really crucial in a lot of these areas. So I'll throw it back to Danny for our takeaways.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So I just want to provide you all with a few specific takeaways that hopefully you can remember and apply really easily when you're involved in rural campaigns. So our first one is focusing on accessibility. The most powerful campaigns are going to be the ones that really involve everyone who's interested and who might be a potential volunteer. So when, a specific volunteer activity doesn't fit a volunteer, make sure you find other ways for them to be involved, whether that's organizing events or relational organizing, like Adam said. We also learned that one of the biggest obstacles in rural areas to campaigns is distance, and remote organizing is a great way of overcoming that. And it's always important to be flexible with locations in order to accommodate people who are a long way away from a specific event or the campaign office. And lastly, to let more people access your campaign, just as Adam was saying, creating a sense of community and letting people know that coming in to an event or to help the campaign out will really give them a chance to connect with other people who share their values and their politics will really help you recruit volunteers. It's a really strong motivator. Our second takeaway is knowing the turf. Each rural turf is really unique. It presents different challenges and opportunities. Your best opportunity to take advantage of that is going to be making sure that the organizer on the ground knows the turf really well. The easiest way to do that is just to hire an organizer who lives in the turf, but that can't always be done. So if you can't do that and you're bringing an outside organizer in, the best thing you can do for them is to start organizing early. Give a couple of months for the organizer to learn the geography and the people in the turf, and to get to have one-on-ones, to get to know exactly how they're going to be organizing the area later. The ramp-up time is long, but an organizer who has that preparation is going to be much more consistent in their outputs than one that's thrown in the deep end. So if you are a field director or running a campaign and you've done this and you've prepared your organizer really well, the best thing you can really do is trust them, because no one's going to know the turf better than the organizer. Rural metrics don't always look the same or work the same as urban or suburban metrics. Make sure that if an organizer tells you that their specific turf doesn't work with this metric or works really well with a specific kind of event, you give them the flexibility to implement that. Now, our third and most important takeaway, we have to learn to organize before and after election season and not just during it. Again and again, when we talked to organizers, we heard a really similar narrative about rural areas, which is that Democratic campaigns come in for election season. They build up an infrastructure and network of voters and really add energy to the area. And then after the election, win or lose, the campaigns disappear. For a year and a half, there's very little activity and most of that infrastructure falls apart. The campaigns reappear for the next election cycle and they have to build from the ground up again. So we really think that the most important thing we can do for energizing rural areas, helping Democrats in these areas, is finding ways to empower other groups, local parties, activist groups, to work to continue organizing these areas outside of the election season, maintaining that energy. This is, of course, easier said than done, but every example of rural areas where Democrats have been successful, of course, Georgia comes to mind, has shown us that we have to elevate our long-term goals and think over multiple election cycles instead of just one at a time. That's really all we have for you guys today. Thank you so much for listening, and I really hope that this report and these takeaways will be helpful to you in rural campaigns you're involved in the future.
Before you two take off, I think there are a fair number of people who work nationally who may have this one question. Okay, you guys have said this, it all makes sense, we get it. What can they do to help these organizers these rural democratic organizations? Is it, paying for some Facebook ads to raise and elevate pro-democratic positions? Is it responding to conditions on the ground when errors are made or challenges to challenge kind of Republicans? What help from the outside coming in, not necessarily on the organizational side, could help build the organizations?
Yeah, I think, the example that comes to mind with my experience being an Iowan is Iowa. So we had a really big Senate race there in 2020. There were tens of millions of dollars that came into the state to fund a really massive campaign, which was awesome. But there's very, very little money to do the type of in-between cycles work that we're talking about. And so I think from my perspective, the biggest thing would be, maybe that extra dollar goes a lot farther in 2021 than it does in the election season to put that one extra ad on TV or send out that one more mailer. And if there's a way that, we can make the funding more consistent, so that long-term work can actually happen.
Well,
yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that a lot of these areas have local and sometimes even state parties that really just don't have that much power or funding. And they're the groups that would be best at doing this a lot of times. So really empowering and funding them to work in the off season would help us a lot.
Well, I just wish everyone would listen to you, and I'm so proud of the work that you've done. I have learned as much from you as I hope you've learned from one country participating. I wish you well. I hope someday to see both of your names, even though neuroscience is not exactly the path forward to become a United States Senator. Adam, we would love to see you in the Senate. And you too, Danny. You guys are great.